Hello, everyone. My name's Tommy. Hope everyone is having a good afternoon, a good evening. Looks like we have some more people just joining us now. So let me make sure I can get everyone in here, make sure everyone's able to join. And let me share my screen as well. All right, screen should be sharing now, I believe. Still have more people joining, which is awesome. Let's get everyone in here before we get started. All right. Okay, cool. I'll keep an eye on the waiting room, but it looks like we have a good number of people in here. So I think we can get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Tommy. I am a teacher at Think Academy, and I've also been doing a lot of work recently with college prep, which kind of is how I tie into this webinar today. We're talking about middle school here, right? But college prep starts in middle school, right? A lot of the actions, a lot of the decisions that students make and that parents make in middle school, and of course in high school as well, have a domino effect, right? And they kind of lead up to college, and they lead into college admissions and college applications. So our topic for today, we're going to talk about school choice in middle school and high school, right? We're going to talk about the different types of schools that are available for students to attend. And we're going to talk about what students can do, depending on the type of school that they're in order to set themselves up in a good position for college or just for success, academic success in general. If you guys have any questions at any point, feel free. You can type questions in the chat as they come up. I'll try to adjust them. Dennis is also here as well, and he can maybe answer your questions as well. We will have time at the end also for like a little Q&A section. But if you have any questions that are kind of relevant to the topic, feel free to throw those in chat at any point. All right. So I think we can get started by talking about school types, right? These are going to be our three topics for today. Choosing a school type and what the differences are between different types of schools, academic readiness and success, right? How to succeed and what students need to be doing in order to succeed in different types of schools. And then we'll talk about a preparation timeline, what you can be doing now and what you should be doing in the future in order to set your child up for success. So we're first going to talk about different types of schools. And there are, I guess, four main categories, right? You have traditional public schools, you have charter schools, magnet schools, and private schools. And I'm just kind of curious, what types of schools are your children in right now? Or most of you guys have kids in public school or private school? You guys can let me know in the chat. What kind of schools do your kids attend right now? Public. Okay. Homeschool. Okay. Yeah, I didn't list homeschool, right? But that is definitely an option. Public. Okay. Private. Yeah, it makes sense. It seems like public school is the most common response, at least so far, which makes sense, right? Because, if we look at the data here, across the country, across the United States, about 3/4 of students attend traditional public schools, which makes sense, right? It's kind of like the default option. Charter schools, magnet schools, private schools, you have to kind of actively enroll in those types of schools, right? There's an application process, there's an admission process. Traditional public school, you don't need to do those sorts of things, right? So if you don't do those sorts of things, that's where the students go. And there's also, I think, way more traditional public schools out there, right, than charter schools and magnet schools and private schools. So definitely the most common type of school. And the characteristics of traditional public schools, they have some benefits, right? They have some things that make them stand out from these other types of schools. First of all, they are kind of open to everyone, right? You don't need an application. You don't need any sort of requirements, right? Everyone can attend public schools. The only sort of restrictions that may come up is, residential address. And this is something that depends on the state and depends on the local school board as well. But in a lot of places, if you're attending a traditional public school, the school that you have to attend depends on where you live. Now, that's not true everywhere, right? I live in Florida, and in Florida, in the state of Florida, students are free to attend any public school anywhere in the state. But that's not true everywhere. All right, I grew up in New York, and in New York, your address kind of determined which school you went to. But traditional public schools are free to attend. There's also free bus transportation, assuming you live in the district. So there are very few barriers for entry in a traditional public school, right? And they have some characteristics that set them apart from other types of schools that we're going to talk about. First of all, they have to adhere to the state standards as far as curriculum, which has benefits and has drawbacks, right? I guess the benefits are the state standards are thoroughly tested, right? So attending a traditional public school is kind of reliable. You kind of know what you're getting into, right? These standards are all readily available online, so you're free to look and see what these standards are that the schools are developing their classes around. For many schools, especially K to 8, math and English are Common Core standards, but again, that does vary by state. Some states adopt Common Core, some states don't. Another element of traditional public schools is that there is a pretty big emphasis on standardized test scores. A lot of states have their own state tests. I know for me, growing up in New York, it was the Regents exams, right? But I know every state kind of does their own thing with that. And then one of the benefits of traditional public schools, there's usually a wide variety of classes. There's usually lots of options for students, right? Because public schools, traditional public schools, have a very diverse student body that they are trying to cater to. They provide lots of options to appeal to lots of students, right? So you may have lots of different AP classes to take in high school, or in middle school, there may be different math tracks for students of different math levels, and so on. And traditional public schools don't have any sort of specific focus, right? They're kind of general, all-around sort of schools. That's different from a charter school. So charter schools do have some similarities, right? And they are still considered to be public schools because they are publicly funded. But a big difference with a charter school compared to a traditional public school is that charter schools aren't bound by state or Common Core standards. So they're public schools in the sense that they are, paid for by tax dollars, right? They are free to attend. But they're also independent from the state in the fact that they can come up with their own curriculum, right? They are free to teach classes the way that they want to teach classes. They may use experimental learning strategies or unique learning strategies that are different from the sort of normal teaching strategies that you would see in a traditional public school. Charter schools also maybe, sometimes they specialize in a particular subject, right? You could have a charter school that specializes in STEM subjects, or a charter school that specializes in arts, right? Or a charter school that specializes in, I don't know, humanities, right? But the key thing about charter schools, I think, is that every school is different because they're not bound by the state standards, right? Because they are able to develop their own curriculum, each school is going to do so a little bit differently. And charter schools, because they're public schools, are supposed to be open to all students. Applications are required, but the way that students are admitted isn't supposed to be based on merit or based on the quality of the application. It's supposed to be random. And again, this is something that's going to depend state by state a little bit. Some states mandate that they use a lottery system to determine who gets admitted. But I know there are some schools also, some charter schools out there that, even if maybe they're supposed to be fair opportunity for every student, it ends up not being that way. So, can vary a little bit. But to give some examples, right? Albuquerque Institute for Mathematics and Science. This is a charter school in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And it's a charter school that has a very, very strong STEM focus. Here we can kind of see this is the mission statement. I got this from their website. The mission of Ames at UNM, UNM being University of New Mexico, it's actually located at University of New Mexico. The mission of Ames at UNM is to provide an extraordinary education to students across New Mexico who are interested in careers that require advanced skills in mathematics, science, and technology. So you can kind of see they specifically mention STEM, right? They specifically mention mathematics, science, and technology in their mission statement. Kind of different from a traditional public school, right? A traditional public school is like, well, we want students to kind of figure out for themselves what they're interested in, right? We want to give them lots of options for different subjects that they can study. Whereas this charter school in New Mexico, we are specifically catering to students that are interested in these STEM fields, these STEM subjects. And that's sort of reflected in the types of opportunities that are available there, the types of classes that they offer, right? For example, every year they have a Rube Goldberg project where students work in teams to design a Rube Goldberg contraption, right? A contraption to perform a simple task. They also have a mandated schedule or a mandated sort of pathway where every single student that attends this school is going to take accelerated math in middle school and is going to finish AP Calculus by grade 11. So in public school, you have the option to do this, right? In this particular charter school, it is required to take accelerated math in middle school and to take AP Calculus by grade 11. Additionally, they also require all of their students to complete 30 college credit hours during high school in order to graduate through dual enrollment classes, right? And again, this might be something that's an option at a traditional public school. I know my school, I went to a public school. My school did have some opportunities for dual enrollment. I know I took like college French classes in high school and I took a college English class as well, but like there were limited opportunities, right? Whereas this school, I guess, especially because of their partnership with UNM, requires students to have 30 college credits done before they even graduate high school, right? So we can kind of see the values here of this school, the focus here, the goal of the school, kind of different, right? They have specific sort of focus in mind, right? And they design their curriculum and they design their classes and they design their content around that goal. And this is actually, you can kind of see, this is, I took this from their website as well. This is the schedule that every student has per grade level. And there is very little flexibility here, right? There's very little choice for students to make. It's like, this is what you're taking and that's it. And you can see the heavy sort of math and science emphasis, right? Even though students are taking English classes and history classes as well, we can kind of see the science and math are sort of very advanced where, you know, they're taking grade 6 and 7 math in grade 6, right? All of the students are taking Algebra 2 and Pre-Calc together in grade 10, right? They're all taking AP Calc in grade 11. And then by grade 12, for both math and science, they are taking college level classes, like dual enrollment classes through a college in their senior year of high school. So, you know, there's pros and cons here, right? There's no flexibility, right? A traditional public school would have way more flexibility, but the trade-off is the sort of pushing them to take something more rigorous, right? Pushing them to push themselves, right? And all of their peers are going to be in that same position. Everyone at the school is going to be kind of in the same boat, working together with this really sort of advanced class schedule. Another type of charter school, there are BASIS charter schools. This is a school system that has multiple locations in 3 different states and in Washington, D.C. It's a little different from the one we saw in Albuquerque. There's no specific like subject specialty for these schools, but they have a particular goal, right? A particular focus. And that I think is something that's true of charter schools. They're going to have a mission statement, right? They're going to have something that they hope to achieve. A traditional public school may not have a mission statement, right? They don't have a particular goal in mind, maybe other than education, right? Whereas charter schools, they have something that they want students to accomplish, to get out of the program. And for these BASIS schools, it's college prep. And in accordance with that mission, right, in accordance with that goal, students at these BASIS schools start taking AP classes in grade 9, whereas in some public schools, traditional public schools, you might not be able to until grade 10 or 11, maybe. Students are required or will complete at least 12 AP classes by the end of grade 11. And then grade 12 is like all college prep stuff. They have what they call capstone classes in their first 2 trimesters of grade 12, which are like post-AP classes. They also have a college counseling seminar that all students are required to do. And then their final trimester of grade 12, they have to do a senior project, which is an internship focused on a research topic of the student's choice. So we can kind of see in the way that the classes are designed and the way that the schedule is built, how they are achieving their goal of college prep, right, and college readiness. Ultimately, though, because charter schools are so different from each other, right, or can be so different from each other, It's kind of hard to say like all charter schools do this, right? Charter schools in general are good for this because that's not really how they work. Instead, the best thing I think you can do if you're interested in potentially, a charter school is to use niche.com to find charter schools near you. Niche also has like reviews from parents and from students. And then once you find schools nearby, the school's websites have a lot of information a lot of the time, right? The websites will tell you about their values, their goals, their approach to learning, all those sorts of things. That's kind of how I found all this information, right? It was on these schools' websites. So with charter schools, because they have so much freedom, because they have so much flexibility, you kind of need to pay attention on a school by school basis as to what is this school actually about, what is their goal, and what do they do for students to help students fit with that goal. There is also a third type of public school, which is a magnet school. Like the other two types of public schools, they are publicly funded and free to attend. Like charter schools, an application is required. Though, again, like charter schools, they're not supposed to be selective, although that ends up not always being true. They're supposed to be open to all students, right? But sometimes that ends up not actually being the case. And again, like charter schools, they often specialize in a particular subject or a particular theme. Could be STEM, right? Could be arts, could be something else. They typically have a smaller variety of courses to choose from compared to a traditional public school. And you might be wondering, this just sounds the same thing as a charter school, right? Does anyone know? I maybe haven't directly mentioned it. It is on the screen here. Does anyone know what the difference between a magnet school and a charter school is? Anyone pick up on it? All right, we know they're both publicly funded. We know they both tend to specialize in certain areas or certain themes or certain subjects. We know they both usually have smaller variety of courses to choose from. But I think the key difference between a magnet school and a charter school is that magnet schools have to adhere to state standards, right? Whereas charter schools do not. And what that means, that doesn't really mean much about like the types of classes that are available, but it's about how the classes are taught, right? You may, have let's say a geometry class in a traditional public school, a magnet school, and a charter school, right? All three may teach geometry. The difference is the traditional public schools and the magnet schools need to teach geometry the way that the state tells them to teach geometry. In the charter school, they can teach geometry the way they think is best to teach geometry. All right, that's the difference. The magnet schools do have specialization, but the way that they teach the classes has to adhere to the way that the state tells them to teach the classes, whereas the charter schools do not. So some examples of magnet schools, just like we saw with the charter schools, right? There are some that have like a STEM focus. Illinois Mathematics and Science Academy would be an example of that. And just to kind of show like the way that they go about their goal of like helping students that are interested in STEM is that for grades 10 to 12, they have 26 different math and computer science courses that students can choose from, right? Similarly, they have 27 different types of science courses that students can choose from. So in this particular school, they do give a lot of choice, right? But it's specifically choice in their specialty area, not choice in general. And presumably this would give students the opportunity to take on lots of math and science electives, right? In addition to their key or their core math and science courses. Additionally, they also have numerous STEM clubs and co-curricular activities like robotics, American Computer Science League, math team, science Olympiad, and many more. There was a whole big list that I came across on their website. So that's one example of a magnet school, right? Another example, LaGuardia High School in New York, which is a music, art, and performing arts school. Their mission statement is, quote, "The mission of this extraordinary specialized high school is to provide all students with conservatory level arts training coupled with rigorous academics," right? So you can kind of see right in their mission statement there, they emphasize their focus on the arts. And clearly this is a school that actually has results because there have been some very famous people, actors, musicians, that have gone to the school, that have graduated from the school. Jennifer Aniston went to LaGuardia High School. Timothy Chalamet is one of the more recent graduates or more recent products of this school that is now very, very popular in Hollywood. Nicki Minaj went to LaGuardia High School, Aquafina, and a whole bunch of other people as well. And just like charter schools, right, because magnet schools can be pretty different from each other in terms of what they're focused on, right, or in terms of what their specialty is. Niche, again, is a pretty good tool to find schools near you. And again, you can look at the websites to find information about values, goals, approach to learning, etc. So just to kind of summarize our three types of public schools, right? We have traditional public schools, we have charter schools, we have magnet schools. There are a lot of things that all three have in common. Because they are all public schools, they are all publicly funded, right? They are all free to attend. They are all accountable to the local school board to some degree. The traditional public schools and the magnet schools are sort of more directly responsible, right, or accountable to them in the sense that their curriculum has to adhere to state standards. The charter schools are free to come up with their own curriculum, but the local school board can, is the one that kind of grants the charter, right? The schools could lose their charter if they're not producing results. So they are still accountable. And they are all supposed to be open to all students. But of course, there are the differences, right? I talked about the standards, the curriculum standards, how the traditional public and the magnet have to follow those standards, whereas the charter do not. They also differ in the variety of their content. All right, traditional public schools don't have a specialty or a focus, but they do offer a wide variety of different classes a lot of the time, whereas charter schools or magnet schools may be more focused on a particular discipline, right? They may focus more on that particular subject area rather than everything. And then, I think because of their differences, they are good for different types of students. So traditional public schools, I think, are a great option for students that want a well-rounded education. They're interested in multiple subject areas. They aren't sure what they want to study in college, right? They want to experience lots of different things, get a taste of everything, right? And kind of use that experience to determine where to go forward once they get to college. Whereas charter schools, because they maybe approach topics differently, right? Because they don't follow state curriculum standards, they're maybe a good option for students that don't thrive in traditional public school settings or with traditional public school curriculum, right? And they want to experience a different approach to learning. They want to, maybe see if a different way of explaining the concepts would resonate better with them, right? I think that's, the type of student that might benefit from a charter school. And then a magnet school is good for students that maybe have a particular subject that they're passionate about, right? That they really want to take a deep dive into. You can find a magnet school that aligns with that subject area. Does anyone have any questions so far about these different types of public schools? I said before, some people weren't here when I started, but if you have any questions at any point, you can throw them in the chat. I'll try to pay attention to the chat. And I think Dennis is also here helping as well with answering questions from the chat. But yeah, if anyone has any questions at any point, please let me know. And if not, I think we can talk about private school, right? Because private school is a little bit different. Private school is not open to everyone, right? Applications are required. And depending on the school, admission can either be kind of open, right? Or very, very limited. It really just depends on the school, right? And how many students they're able to accommodate and, what their sort of admission requirements are and also how in demand the school is. But a lot of times for a lot of private schools, admission can be merit-based, right? Students may need to complete admission tests and send in their test scores as part of their application. Students maybe need to write application essays some of the time or conduct interviews. And because private schools are private, they are not free to attend. The average annual cost in 2025 was around $15,000, according to privateschoolreview.com. But this also can vary pretty drastically depending on the school. Some private schools are very cheap or sometimes even free in rare cases if they get like private funding from somewhere else. Like some religious schools, I think, are kind of more on the affordable end some of the time. Whereas, there are other private schools that may cost $60,000 or more per year. So the average is around $15,000, but it's just an average, right? There could be outliers on either end of the spectrum there. And then as far as their curriculum, they are not bound by state or Common Core standards, just like the charter schools aren't. The schools have control over their content. They have control over their teaching strategies. And every private school, because they are private, is different, right? There are lots of different types of private schools. You have religious schools, right? There are Montessori schools, lots of different, approaches to education, lots of different values in terms of what the schools are prioritizing, right? We can look at some examples here to kind of demonstrate that. I think Harvard Westlake School is a very well-known school in Los Angeles, and it kind of has a reputation as being like an Ivy League feeder school, right? Approximately 30% of graduates are admitted to Ivy League universities, which is an insanely high percentage, honestly. Right, and that's kind of their thing, right? Their thing is they are preparing students specifically for like these Ivy League universities, right, and getting them admitted to these top level colleges. But then on kind of like a totally different end of the spectrum, you have a school like Convent of the Sacred Heart in New York City, which is a Catholic all girls school, right? Totally different goal here, totally different values, totally different focus, right? This is a religious school. It is catering to a very particular demographic, right? Specifically Catholic girls. So, this, I think, example kind of demonstrates the variety you can get with private schools. And this variety exists, again, because they are private, right? They are independent. There can be drastic variations in curriculum, values, goals, and educational strategies between private schools. So now that we know about the different types of schools, the question becomes, which one's the best, right? Or like, which one should I choose? And I have thoughts on that, and of course I'm going to share my thoughts on that. But maybe you guys can let me know what you think. Does anyone, based on what we just talked about, does anyone have any thoughts about like which type of school is the best or like the most appealing, or are you maybe not sure? I think it can be hard to say. Public, okay. Got to vote for public school. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think there definitely are benefits to public school, right? Charter one, yeah. I think charter schools have benefits too. Yeah. I think it depends though, right? Like, I think it is totally, I think you could say any of these, and I might agree, right? I think if someone says public school, I might say, yeah, public school can be pretty good, right? Charter schools, they can be pretty good too. And same thing with magnet schools, and same thing with private schools. And I think, choosing a school isn't even just about choosing a type of school, but also choosing a specific school of that type, right? Because like we talked about, there are drastic differences from one type of charter school to another, or one type of private school to another, right? So I think every school has benefits, every school has drawbacks, and I think you want to think about, what is best for your specific child, right? A lot of people will say private school because it's private, it's better, and it definitely could be, right? But not always, right? It really depends. Each individual school has its own strengths and weaknesses that could make it a better fit or a worse fit for each individual student. So when choosing a school, I don't think, it's I want to go to this type of school because it's has a better reputation, right, than this other type of school. I think class rankings, or sorry, school rankings, I should say, are like a really common thing too, right? Like you could go on, like, I think US News has school rankings, right? And look at like top schools in the United States, and you'll get a whole easily ordered list, right? It's like 1 is this, 2 is this. But those rankings are kind of one-dimensional. They're largely based on standardized test scores, right? They're looking at like how students in those schools are doing on tests, which, I mean, yeah, that's a good sign. If a lot of students in those schools are doing well, that does, suggest that maybe the school is a positive learning environment. But I don't think it paints a complete picture, right? I mean, yeah, it tells us that maybe that school is good for standardized tests specifically, right? But I think there's more to learning than just standardized tests. And I think it also maybe tells us more about the academic level of the student body than it does like the quality of education, right? It tells us that the students in that school are doing well in their standardized tests, but we don't necessarily know if it's the school that's doing that or the fact that, all the students that are going to that school, maybe that school is just really selective, right? And, they only admitted the highest performing students in the first place. So school rankings on their own aren't the full story, right? They don't paint a complete picture of the quality of education that a school provides. I think instead we can be looking for other things, other factors, such as, if we're looking at a middle school, does this school allow for acceleration in middle school, right? My student, let's say, for example, my son is really good at math and he wants to get ahead in math. Does this school allow that in middle school, right? Or, maybe some schools even offer like accelerated science, right? To take like biology in eighth grade when normally they wouldn't take it until high school, right? Or something like that. So that's something to look into, right? Like, is my student able to get ahead in middle school at this school if that's something that they are capable of doing? Or if you're looking at a high school, does this high school offer many AP classes, right? Maybe I want my daughter to be able to take a lot of AP classes in high school because they look good on her transcript, right? She can earn college credits. So maybe that's something that I care about. Or, maybe my child has a particular interest, right? Or a particular strength, and I want them to foster that interest. Is this school a good place for my child to do that? Ultimately, what it boils down to is, will this school provide my child with everything that he or she needs to succeed? Right? It's not, there's no way to quantify that with a ranking, right? You need to be able to identify what your child needs. And then once you understand what your child needs, then I think you can find a school that has that, right? Or has the resources that they need. And I think to identify what those needs are, or to identify maybe what to look for in a school, there's 5 big questions you can ask yourself and ask your child as well. First, what are your child's interests? Right? Does your child have something specific they want to focus on? Right? If your child is really, really into STEM subjects, then I think you could go to a STEM-focused charter school or private school or magnet school, right? And that would be a good fit. Or maybe, is your child really interested in the arts, right? Then they could maybe pursue an art school. Or if they're really interested in humanities, right? Maybe there's a school that's good for that. Or maybe they're interested in lots of things, right? And then maybe you don't want to lock yourself into one particular sort of specialty, right? Maybe you want to go to a school with more variety. Another thing, what are your child's strengths and weaknesses? And this relates to subject area, but this, I think even more importantly, what are your child's strengths and weaknesses in learning strategy, right? Because, we talk a lot about like content and like subjects that schools focus on, but I think the way that they teach these subjects is also really important too. If your child is someone that maybe doesn't learn very well from textbooks, then that's something you want to consider, right? Does this school teach a lot from textbooks, or are they not very big on using textbooks, right? Or maybe your child is really good at learning through discussion, right? And like hands-on stuff, and not so much good at learning from like lectures. You might want to look into these different schools and see, do they do a lot of lecture-based instruction, right? Where the students just kind of sit and listen? Or are they very hands-on, right? Are they very discussion-based, where students are constantly participating and, being involved? So I think that's a really important factor. I think it's also important to think about, the current school that your child is in, right? If you're considering switching, what do you like and what do you not like about your child's current school? And what do they like and not like about their current school, right? If you can identify those things, then, you can get a better idea, I guess, of what factors to look for in a different school, right? Keep the things you like, but look for a school that does something different with the things that you don't like. Are there any specific resources or programs that you think would benefit your child? This could be, something. This could be a certain type of class, right? That maybe is only available at one school and not another. Some schools do things like, I don't know if this is a nationwide thing, but my school in New York had BOCES, which was like kind of like not what's the term? Like learning how to like solder stuff, or like learning like construction stuff, or like more hands-on things, right? Things you wouldn't normally get in a traditional school setting. So like, maybe that's something that your child shows interest in, right? And that's something you could look for. Or maybe it's even, extracurriculars, right? Like maybe your child has a particular skill that's like unusual and there's not really classes about it, but like one school has a club that focuses on that topic or that thing, right? Those are things you can look out for as well. And then ultimately, I think the big thing, right, what it all kind of boils down to is, what's your goal, right? What are you hoping to get out of education, and what is your child hoping to get out of their education, right? If you can identify a specific goal, and this could be a short-term goal or a long-term goal or both, right? If you can identify a specific goal, then I think you can find a school that aligns with that goal. And the schools will be very upfront, right? We saw before in those mission statements, these schools tell us what their goals are. So if you can identify your goal, I think it's easy to find a school that matches with that goal, or at least it's easier, right? And it gives you something to look for. And choosing a school isn't choosing an outcome, right? If you pick a school that specializes in STEM, that does not automatically mean, right, that students are going to become really proficient at STEM subjects, right? If you choose a school that's known for college admissions and college prep, does not automatically mean that students are going to be able to get into a top college, right? You're choosing a path when you choose a school, but you're not choosing an outcome. Students still need to make the right decisions within their chosen path in order to achieve the outcome they desire. And I think that kind of leads us into our second topic, which is how to succeed in different types of schools, how to prepare as well. We're going to talk about. We're going to talk essentially about things that students and parents can do based on school type to make sure that their student is, set up for success. And as we've talked about, right, different schools have different standards, different curriculum, different resources, right? And this, of course, is going to impact the actions that students need to take to succeed, as well as the actions maybe that parents should take, or at least the things that parents should be aware of, right, and thinking about. If we look at this data from College Board from 2016, now it is 2016, right? So the data is slightly outdated, but I mean, it's not that long ago. It should still be fairly similar now. College Board kind of, collected the GPAs of all students that took the SAT. And what they found is that private school students have a higher GPA on average than public school students by like a somewhat significant margin here, right? Like 3.28 compared to 3.5, that's a pretty substantial difference. And what this means is not that private schools are just automatically better, right? I think what this means is that private schools, generally speaking, right? Again, every private school is a little different. Every school in general is a little different. But private schools, generally speaking, do more to help lower performing students improve their GPAs without the student needing to kind of request that help. And I think this is also sort of reflected by the student to teacher ratio, right? We can see, and again, this is on average, but on average, private students have a much lower student to teacher ratio, right? Meaning that there is more staff available per student to help those students. And because of this, right, because they have more hands available to assist, they have a greater ability to identify students that need help, right? And they have a greater ability to give personalized assistance to those students. Now, this doesn't mean that students that aren't in private schools just have to suffer, right? Or that they have to struggle. What it means is that students in public schools may need to advocate for themselves a little bit more, right? And I think parents maybe should be more attentive if students are in public school to make sure that they're staying on track, right? I think in public school, you're not going to have teachers and staff as focused on each individual child. So I think as a parent, that's something that, hopefully you guys can pay attention to, right? To make sure that when students need help, they're able to get that help, right? I think any student that goes to a teacher in a public school, and says, hey, I need help with this, they'll be able to get that help, right? The same way they would in a private school. I think the private schools are just maybe a little bit more attentive to it. Another thing, and this is especially, more so true in public schools, traditional public schools compared to maybe charter schools or magnet schools or private schools, that students need to make decisions with, and I think parents should also be aware of and involved in, is course selection. We talked about before how like charter schools and magnet schools and private schools have, limited options a lot of the time. And again, every school is a little different, right? But a lot of the time they may have single tracks for students. We saw that with the example of the school in Albuquerque, right? How pretty much every student is just taking the same classes, right? They don't really have any choices. But in traditional public schools, there are lots of options, especially when students get to high school. There are many different courses that students can pick from. In middle school, there may be different like math tracks, right? Depending on math placement tests and things like that. So there's a lot more variety, a lot more options, a lot more decisions that need to be made in public schools compared to private schools, charter schools, magnet schools. And students need to be aware, right, of their decisions and what options are available. And I think parents should also be informed about their options as well. The types of decisions that you may need to make in high school, which AP classes to take and when to take them, right? Students may need to decide between AP biology versus AP chemistry versus AP physics, right? Which one should I take? Or maybe they also have the option of not taking an AP class, right, and taking an honors class instead. So that's a decision that they need to think about, right? And also the when to take them part is important too, right? Because it's not just the case that like, okay, once I make a decision about AP biology or honors biology in grade 10, that's it. Because later on, you still have AP biology as an option, right? It's still there. It's still something you can take. So maybe you do want to take AP biology at some point, but you need to decide if you want to take it in grade 10 or grade 11, right? So all these sorts of things are going to be mostly up to students' choice in traditional public schools. Also, dual enrollment might be an option, right? Students may need to decide, do I take an AP class or a dual enrollment class? I had this choice when I was in high school in 12th grade. I could either take AP Lit, AP English Literature and Composition, or I could take college English through, I believe it was LIU, Long Island University. I don't remember the exact school, but there was a local college that, I could take a class in my high school and get credit from that college, right? So that's the decision I had to make. Which one's better, the AP class or the dual enrollment class, right? Which electives should I take, right? Should I take electives that align with my interests? Should I take additional AP classes as electives? All of these sorts of decisions are going to be up to the student, right? And it can be overwhelming a little bit. So it's something that requires, attentiveness and knowledge and research, maybe. This graphic here on the right is actually taken from a blog post on our website. If you go to thethinkacademy.com, there's like a blog section. Scroll down a little bit, you can see we did some articles about like AP classes, specifically like AP science classes and like which ones to take and when to take them. So if you're interested in that, we do have some information on that available. But you can kind of see there's lots of different options, right? Like there's no one set path. It's up for the students to kind of figure out what they like and the parents to decide what they think is good, right? And then for the decision to kind of be made that way. And then in middle school, math acceleration is a thing that is, sometimes available in other schools, but primarily available in traditional public schools, right? Where students can take a standard math track, they can take an accelerated math track, or maybe even a double accelerated math track. So that's another thing that, we need to be aware of these things, right? Whereas in a private school or a charter school or a magnet school, sometimes we don't need to be as aware because the school makes the decisions for us. And I think this discussion of math acceleration can kind of lead us into our next topic here, which is like, what should we actually be doing, right? Preparation timeline, based on the type of schools that your students are currently in, or maybe the types of schools they want to switch to in the future. What should we be doing? When should we be doing it? And I think the first thing we can talk about is that math acceleration. You can kind of see this flow chart here from Pleasanton School District. The typical math sort of pathway, right, is for students to take algebra their freshman year of high school, right, grade 9, then geometry grade 10, algebra 2 grade 11, and then maybe pre-calc grade 12, right, with like no real room for AP classes or no time to take calculus before college. But most public schools have accelerated tracks available, right, based on your performance on a math placement test. And the accelerated math will allow students to take AP math classes in 11th grade or 12th grade, right, including AP Calc, AP Stats, and so on. And ultimately, the placement test will usually come at the end of grade 5, right, prior to entering middle school in grade 6. And the goal for students in order to, succeed on this placement test, if they do want to pursue an accelerated math track, would be to master grade 5 and grade 6 math by the end of grade 5. If they're able to do that, they'll be in a good position to pass this placement test and prepare for an accelerated course. So you can see the sort of general timeline here, right? We want to finish and master all the grade 5 topics by the beginning of the sort of grade 5 school year, right? That way we have time to also master and learn the grade 6 topics before the end of the grade 5 school year. And then by the end of grade 5, hopefully students can pass that placement test and they're prepared to take even higher level concepts the following year, right? Like grade 7 and potentially grade 8 concepts. Think Academy does have a class that would be really good for helping with this. I know some of you guys are probably already enrolled in the class, but for anyone that isn't already enrolled, Think Academy's grade 5 honors class essentially covers a lot of these topics that students need to know for the placement test. I know this is a little blurry here, but you can see on the right, all these topics that are talked about in the grade 5 fall class, these are all mostly, grade 6 Common Core topics, right? So if students need to know grade 5 and grade 6 topics in order to do well on the placement test, the grade 5 honors class will cover a lot of those grade 6 topics, right? And prepare them pretty well for that placement test. It includes, negative integers, mixed operations with fractions, algebraic expressions and equations, statistical concepts, word problems, word problems involving coordinate plane, surface area, and so on. So this is an opportunity. This is a resource available for anyone that needs help or wants to make sure that they are prepared for a placement test. Now, for students that are maybe in a or pursuing a school that maybe doesn't offer math acceleration, or maybe in the future are hoping to switch to a different type of school, I also want to give some information about the timeline for the school change process. It's kind of like a 5-step thing, right? First, you want to make sure you spend time researching schools and choose a school that fits with your goal, right? We talked before about the educational goal. Choose a school that matches with your educational goal. The third step would be to start taking admission tests if they are required. Admission tests are mostly for private school applications. There's 2 popular ones, the SSAT and the ISEE. Some schools will let you choose between them. Some schools will require one or the other. Some schools even have their own admission tests. So it really kind of depends. But if admission tests are required, that's kind of the first thing you want to start working on once you've chosen the school that you want to apply to. After you've taken the admission tests, you can complete the remaining application requirements. And then finally, step 5, apply for admission. If you are hoping to apply to a school that requires an admission test, it's recommended to start this process 2 years before the entry grade. And the reason for that is because it gives you time, it gives the students time to take the SSAT or ISEE multiple times. If you take it multiple times, you have more opportunities to submit your better score, right? And especially with the ISEE, they offer very limited test dates. So the reason why we recommend starting this process 2 years before is to make sure you have time to, make those test dates, and the students have the opportunity to, take the test more than once if they need to, right, and submit their best score. So I say this first step of researching and choosing a school is like 2.5 years before, but if you're applying to a school that doesn't require those admission tests, you definitely don't need to do it that far in advance. You maybe could do it a year or a year and a half in advance. And this is years before the entry date, right? So, or entry grade. So if you're aiming to enter a new school in grade 9, this first step, if you need an admission test, should be done like the summer before grade 7. Whereas maybe if you don't need an admission test, maybe you could start this the summer before grade 8, right? Meanwhile, if you're aiming to enter a new school in grade 6, if you need an admission test, summer before grade 4. If you don't need an admission test, maybe summer before grade 5. And we can use niche.com to find schools like we talked about before, right? Niche has reviews from parents and students. Go to the school's website, find information about their curriculum, their values, their goals, their teaching methods, and whether they specialize in any certain theme or any certain topic or subject. A lot of schools offer open houses and campus tours. That way you can get a good feel of what the school is actually like, right? And what the classrooms are look like, how they're set up, and what the campus is like. And then ultimately, you want to choose the school that will be best for your child's individual needs. Your next step is going to be, and again, if required, right? If you're not applying to a school that requires an admission test, you can skip this step. But your next step would be to start preparing and taking those standardized tests. The SSAT or ISEE, again, which one you have to take maybe depends on the school. Some will allow either, some will mandate one or the other. You really want to check with the school. And like I said, it's recommended to take it more than once to increase the chance of getting a good score. So I kind of have it here like 2 years before you could take it for the first time, 1.5 years before you could take it another time, right? And a year before you could take it for the final time. I will also say the ISEE has much more limited test dates than the SSAT. The ISEE only allows students to take it once every 4 months. So they offer it once in the fall, once in the spring, once in the summer. Whereas the SSAT, you can take it like, I think once a month. I'm not 100%. I think it depends. So the SSAT gives you multiple different ways you can take the test. You can take it online, you can take it on paper, you can take it at home, you can take it in a testing center, right? So there's lots of options available. And I think you have certain amounts of ways that you can take it via the different methods. So if you can get really creative, right, you might be able to take it like 3 times in a 3-month span, right? Whereas maybe if you stick with one testing option, you might not be able to take it as frequently. But it is recommended to take these more than once if possible, right? And then the next step after that would be to complete any remaining requirements. So, if you're entering a new school grade 9, you would do this in the summer or fall of grade 8, right? The beginning of grade 8 or maybe a little before grade 8. These requirements may include an essay, an interview. If it's an art school, maybe a portfolio, letters of recommendation, transcripts, report cards. But again, every school is different. Every school has different requirements, right? So you're going to want to look at what your school that you are applying to requires. And then, of course, the final step would be to submit your application. And for most schools, the deadline is the winter before the entry year. So if you were entering fall grade 9, this would be sometime in the winter of grade 8, right? But it does, again, depend on the school. We do have some free resources available. I do want to let you guys know about for grade 5 and grade 6 students. We have a middle school to top college guide. This is something you'll receive automatically if you registered for the webinar. You should receive this soon in your email. It's a PDF. It's 53 pages. It includes information on school selection, so some of the stuff we talked about today. It includes information of how to stay ahead in academics in middle school. There is a guide on STEM-related extracurricular activities in there. And then we also have some stories from former Think Academy students that are now in college. And they talk about their experiences, what they did in middle school and in high school, right? And how that helped them succeed. So this is something you guys will all receive via email. Another resource that we have for free for grade 5 and grade 6 students is the middle school readiness exam. You guys can scan the QR code on the screen right now to get your free exam. The exam includes Common Core grade 5 and grade 6 math questions, a detailed test report, and then customized study advice based on the student's performance. So again, this is another free resource. I will leave this on the screen for a second in case anyone is in the process of scanning it. I don't want to skip ahead on you guys. Also, if anyone has any questions, we are approaching the end of our webinar. So if you have any questions and you want to start, writing them out in chat, that would be great, especially while we're waiting to see if anyone is still scanning this code. All right, I think we are probably good. And I'm about to put some more codes on your screen. If you have any questions, if you want to keep in contact, right, if you're interested in getting more information about anything that we talked about today, there are some ways that you can keep in touch with us. On the screen, you can see my WhatsApp code on the right here. You can scan that to send me a message and keep in contact with me. My email address is also on the screen, thomas.gagliano@thethinkacademy.com. And then the WeChat code here is for Dennis, if you want to keep in contact with Dennis. And then, yeah, if you have any questions right now, feel free to ask in chat. We still have a couple minutes, so I am definitely available now to answer any questions anyone might have. And Dennis can help answer questions as well. Okay, seems like not many questions. Is there any ISE preparation course? Good question. I don't think Think Academy offers one right now, but if you're interested in prep materials for the ISEE, maybe send me a message on WhatsApp. I can look into that for you, and I can see if I can find any materials. But yeah, I don't think there is a course right now. Is the recording available afterwards? I believe it should be, yeah. I am recording. Dennis can probably confirm, but I believe that should be available. What does ISAE mean? I actually don't know what it stands for, but it is one of the two types of tests that private schools specifically, and sometimes I guess charter schools, mag schools, but mostly private schools use for admission to middle schools and to high schools. So the SAT, right, we have for college. Colleges use SAT scores as part of their admission process. High schools and middle schools use either the ISEE or the SSAT for admission. Victor, thank you for the breakdown of the acronym, Independent School Entrance Exam. Makes sense. That is a fitting name for sure. Can we see the previous slide? Yeah, definitely. There you go. What's the connection of AP and GPA? So this is a good question as well. AP classes are harder than standard classes, right? Whether it's honors classes or regular classes. So on a regular GPA, if you take AP classes, it might be harder to get a higher score, right? So that is a consideration, but a lot of schools also have weighted GPAs, and AP classes are weighted heavier in a weighted GPA system than honors classes and then regular classes are. So for students that have a school with a weighted GPA system, AP classes are going to boost their weighted GPA a lot, right? Essentially, AP classes will allow students to exceed a 4.0. What does weighted and unweighted mean? So unweighted treats all classes as equal, right? An unweighted GPA treats every class as the same regardless of the difficulty of that class, whereas a weighted GPA system treats more challenging classes as more important, right? So instead of being out of a 4.0, maybe the weighted classes get a score out of a 5.0, the AP classes, for example. This is something that every school does a little bit differently. But the general idea is if the school has a weighted GPA system, students are rewarded for taking more challenging classes. If the private school still has state standards to be met as the public school. So every private school is going to kind of have their own, I guess, way of going about things. Some private schools may choose to design their classes based on the state standards, but private schools are not required to adhere to state standards, which means they're not required to administer state tests, standardized state tests. And when they're designing their classes, they are not required to have their classes taught the same way that they would be taught in a state school, a public school. right? Private schools are free to design their curriculum however they want, whereas traditional public schools and magnet schools have to teach their classes the way that the state tells them to teach their classes. How does math competitions help in college admissions? So math competitions, I think, would be treated more as an extracurricular, right? So that's something you could add to a resume and say, I participated in this competition and this was my result, right? And that's something that colleges would consider as an extracurricular activity. I think it would show dedication, right? It would show academic, that someone is academically minded, right? And of course, I think, the preparation for math competitions also helps in school math as well, right? It helps students succeed in their school math classes and maybe better prepares them to take AP classes and things like that. But that would be something that, yeah, it could be added on a resume as an extracurricular activity. And it would showcase more of the students, I guess, interests and passions, and the fact that they like challenging themselves as well. So it's definitely a beneficial thing to add to a college application. It's definitely something that shows the school that the student is passionate about math, right? And also that the student likes being challenged intellectually and academically. All right, and it looks like we are just about out of time. Are there any last minute questions before I go? All right, awesome. Then I think we are all done. Thank you to everyone that came out. I appreciate that. I appreciate all your questions as well. I hope this was informative to everyone. And I hope you all have a great rest of your night. Bye, everyone.